Welcome into the latest episode of the 5 Reasons Podcast. I'm Ethan Skolnick, back with Chris Whittingham. Was in England for another week. I feel like that's his second home at this stage. But we are together again today. We've done a few podcasts together, and this is the second one we've done from up in Jupiter at Marlins Spring Training. We've been spending a lot of time up here. A lot of guys in our network, Jeremy Taché, Craig Mish, the guys from Cinco Razones, Tony Capobianco. So we've had a lot of people up here at Marlins, and today we want to talk to the man who's sort of in charge of putting this thing together. And you're probably familiar with him. He's actually been on Swings and Mishes. You should check that episode out as well. That was out a few months ago. But it's Michael Hill, Marlins executive. Michael, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure, guys.
And we're doing this actually. Can I reveal this? Where we're doing this podcast from? Is that okay?
Yeah.
We are sitting on Derek Jeter's cart.
Yeah.
So, you know, this is like a place of royalty, basically. And
that's him on the phone.
This is a Hall of Fame cart. He wants to know why the hell these two people are sitting on his cart out here at Marlins Spring Training. We're going to spend some time with Mike here today, and want to start here with you because it's a little bit of a parallel situation. I was talking to Chris before the podcast of we were talking about the Dolphins, and that there's someone there, you know, who's an executive who's now in charge of the whole operation, and Chris Greer, who's been there for a long time, but things have kind of changed under his feet. And so what he's doing now may not be what he was doing before, or the same way he was doing it before. What was your first year with the Marlins, Mike?
My first year was 2002. I came in the fall of 2002. I like to tell myself I was the last piece to that World Series build back in 2002. But I came over as assistant GM in 2002. At the end of the 07 season, I was promoted to GM. And then at the end of the 13 season, I was promoted to president of baseball operations.
So how do you summarize how your job is? Not obviously, I know ownership has changed. We're going to get into that. But just your job specifically, how is it different? How are your daily responsibilities different from, say, they were 3-4 years ago?
Well, 3 or 4 years. I guess I've been president of baseball operations since 13, so the last 5 years. But prior to becoming that, you know, now I'm the senior most person in president of baseball operations. So, I mean, you don't do anything in any sport. You don't do it by yourself. Obviously, you know, Don Mattingly is the manager, and he is my partner through all of this. Our assistant GM, Brian Chatton, is a huge, you know, assistance to me. Our vice president of player development and scouting, Gary Dimbo, oversees our minor leagues and our scouting operations. So, you know, I may be the president of baseball operations, but I'm definitely not alone in what I do on a day in and day out basis.
Yeah, and I was curious from your vantage point what the transition was like, because I think we saw when the new ownership took over that there were a lot of changes, but you were kind of the one mainstay. What was that process like for you? Did you think that you were going to be kept around? And in general, what has that change been like for you?
Well, you know, from my standpoint, it's something I always share with all of our players. You control what you can control. And you know, I know I had a job to do when the transition happened and new ownership came. We had clear lines of what we wanted to get accomplished, and they had enough confidence in me to empower me to do that, and we set out to do a job. So, you know, in this game, you know, this is my 25th year in the front office, and as Ethan said, I've done pretty much everything. You know, I started as an assistant, you know, 25 years ago in copies and airport runs, and I've worked my way up, you know, to oversee, you know, a baseball department. So I'm very comfortable in my knowledge of the game and my experience within the game, and I'm thankful that the new ownership, you know, saw and felt like I was the right person to lead our baseball department in this new era of Marlins baseball.
So take us through those conversations a little bit. So Bruce Sherman comes in, Derek comes in, new ownership group. How do you sort of make the case? Did you have to make the case, or was it kind of made for you in some ways, that you were the right guy to lead this going forward? Because we see new ownership groups come in all the time and they just clean house and everybody's gone. What was that conversation like? What can you share about that?
Really, I think all of that had been done previously, had done prior to them walking through the door. I think there was a clear path, through their due diligence. I think they understood what they wanted to do. I think the biggest thing for me and our department was just our direction and the direction that we were going. We had just come off a 77-win season with the reigning MVP in Stanton, and then with Yelich and Ozuna and Realmuto, and it was a very talented group of position players, but there wasn't nearly enough pitching, and the minor league system was barren. And really, I just gave my evaluation of where I felt we were as an organization, and that's where we started the conversation.
So that was your assessment of the team. I think a skeptical fan might say, well, you were part of the organization as that happened. So I guess my question would be, was that self-assessment based off of the results that played out on the field, or do you think years worth of process that maybe had gone wrong?
I think all of the above. When you're making decisions and tough decisions, I think you really do have to look in the mirror, and you need to be a fair self-evaluator. We challenge our players to be, accurate self-evaluators. I think we had to be honest with where we were as an organization, the missteps that had been taken, and really be honest and take a deep, hard look at what needed to be done in order to right the ship, put us in the right direction, and put us on solid foundation.
Would you be willing to say, even if it's just one, and even if it was minor, just an area that you think has turned over in the organization from where you were to where you are now, that in that self-assessment you identified this is an area where we need to fix something or that we can improve?
Well, it was no secret that our minor league system was barren. To build anything sustainable, you need to have waves of talent. You need to have a strong minor league system upon which you're built. So it's your foundation, and we just didn't have it. When you're chasing championships, you're always gonna think about the now and not think about the future, not think about the process and developing and growing, because you're chasing it. And our goal is still the same. Our goal is to win a championship, but we understood that we needed to make a tough decision to trade off a lot of talented players, but put us in a much better situation moving forward. It didn't work with those talented position players. We didn't have the pitching. We didn't have the minor league system. And so, to think that we were a player or two away just wasn't realistic. That wasn't being honest with yourself, to think you're one or two players away. So you make the tough decisions. You start the process in the fall of 2017 with the trades, the trading D. Gordon, the trading Giancarlo Stanton, the trading Marcell Ozuna, and you get back talent in return. We ultimately traded Yelich in January of 2018, but through those 4 trades, we brought in 28 impactful prospects. So you start that, process of rebuilding your system, and now fast forward another year beyond that offseason, and we traded JT Realmuto. In the last 18 months, it's been 38 new prospects into the organization. 12 of the top 15 prospects in the organization are new, under new ownership. We have layers of talent from the lower levels of our minor leagues up through AAA. Most importantly, in my mind, we have starting pitching. We have layers of starting pitching. And that is what is going to give you that ability to be sustainable, to compete on a year-in, year-in basis for championships. And that's the goal. That's the message that was abundantly clear to me from my time with Bruce Sherman and Derek Jeter. They're not doing this for short-term gains. They're doing this for long-term sustainable success, and that's why I'm so excited, and that's why there's reasons to be excited about what we're building here in South Florida.
So let's you mentioned the players, and you've mentioned the 5 core position players that we talk about that you guys ended up moving to bring in all these prospects. Did you look at them as a collective group? Like when you're evaluating this and you're saying, okay, we need to reset, the minor league system's not where it needs to be, we need to bring in prospects. Did you sort of put these guys, your 3 outfielders, D, JT, sort of down a list and say, look, ultimately in the next 18 months, we're going to have to move these 5 guys? Or was it kind of on as an opportunity arose with each of them?
Well, that was what changed, with the ownership change, is that, we knew that, where those players were in terms of their careers and control of their careers, that we wanted to make smart decisions, and that is managing your roster and maximizing value and getting the best return, on your assets. And so there was research done, and we spent a lot of time talking about each player and what we felt like their value was and what we thought we needed to do. And ultimately it made the most sense for where we were as an organization to take them to market. Realmuto didn't get traded in the offseason of 17 because we didn't feel like we were getting fair value for him in those discussions. With other deals, we felt like we got tremendous value. And that's ultimately what my job is, and our job in baseball operations is to manage our roster, to try to maximize value of our assets, to put us in the best position to be successful.
So there are other teams in Major League Baseball that have embarked upon somewhat similar paths. We've seen this. We've seen in other sports too. We see what went on with the Cleveland Browns, the Philadelphia 76ers, where there's a reset. How much did you sort of take from, say, what Houston has done or some other organizations have done, where they were willing to sort of take it down, to sort of the beginning to restart? Like, what can you take from the other processes and how they've worked out?
Well, just the history of the game, you look at what allows you to be sustainable, and there's only so many organizations that can run $200 million payrolls. You have to be able to do it through your scouting and your development and your analytics and your resources, your manpower. That is what you invest in because you're in talent collection. You're trying to build. So you want to add as much talent, make the smartest decisions that you can in order to bring the right talent back that will put you in a position to be successful. And, I know in Houston's situation, they had 3 consecutive 100-loss seasons, and then they had another, season with a losing record before they really turned that corner. But in that process, they accumulated a lot of talent. They answered a lot of questions with the players that they had internally. Some stayed in the Springers and the Correas and Altuves, turned into their core that led them to a championship. And there were others that didn't work out and, moved on. But it just speaks to building something the right way on a solid foundation, by using your manpower and your scouting and your development and your analytics to make smart decisions, to bring the right guys in, to give you that opportunity to build something sustainable. And Houston's a perfect example of a club that struggled for a long time, but then once they got those young players to the big leagues, it was their system that's allowed them to stay competitive and stay in a situation where they're competing on a year in and year out basis.
Now, you mentioned those guys that are the basis for Houston, and a major part of that, part of the questions about this are that can you find and then develop those guys and regularly sort of churn out that, as you say, those waves of talent? Do you feel like those 3 or 4 guys that you mentioned, Correa, Springer, and Altuve, that the Marlins version of those 3 players are in the camp right now?
We were very excited with what we were able to get back in our trades, and obviously those guys are special players, MVPs, and all-stars that Houston has acquired and developed, and we're hopeful of similar futures for our guys. As I said, our goal is to win championships and put ourselves on an annual basis to compete for championships, and I think when you look at what has come back and what we've been able to accumulate, you do have impact position players who are still young in their careers, and so they're going to go through their growing pains, but we're very confident in their abilities. But I think where I think we're sort of ahead of the curve is with our pitching, and I think that is what will allow us to compete more quickly, and why we don't think that this is going to take a long time when we think about returning this organization to playoff baseball. because we feel like we've been able to acquire frontline starting pitching. When you're talking about Jose Urena, who was existing, but then a Sandy Alcantara, a Pablo Lopez, a Trevor Richards, Caleb Smith, and those are guys competing at the major league level. Our minor league pitcher of the year, Nick Neidert, is at AAA. Zach Gallen, who came over in the St. Louis trade, is also a AAA, was a AAA All-Star for us last year. Jorge Guzman and Sixto Sanchez be at AA, along with Robert Duggar. All guys who project as starters and productive major league starters. And then you go even lower and you go to high A in the Jupiter Club, and you have Jordan Holloway, who's 6'6", throwing 100 miles an hour, and Edward Cabrera. And, the list of the layers of pitching is really where you get excited because that you have waves of talent that you're building that are going to put you in a position to compete on a year in and year out basis.
I want to get into some of the benchmarks that you look for when you're looking for particular prospects, whether it's position players or pitchers. But first, I think there's a lot of interest in this. You mentioned that a year ago you didn't have a trade you liked for Realmuto and that you were waiting for the right trade. Because I think fans are always interested in how these processes work. Okay, and I know one of our guys, Craig Mish, was reporting it on a daily basis and putting up his percentages on where he was going to end up. And I'm just going to say he didn't end up necessarily where he projected. He
was so wrong, and I tell him that all the time.
I think that needed to be said because I think Atlanta was way up there for a long time. So I'm just curious, what is that like for you? You have a player who is obviously a coveted player. I think there's no question that JT is a top 3 catcher in baseball in terms of being an all-around catcher and a young guy who's known as a good clubhouse guy. So how do you what was that like on a daily basis? Take us through Mike Hill's day if you can, as you've got this player that all these contenders want.
Well, there's no normal day, there's no average day, because every day comes with its new challenges, but rewinding and going through the episode with JT, he's a good player, so obviously he's going to be attractive, and there's clubs that have interest in him. He's, just to give you the details of everybody, he was a 4+ major league service, so 2 more years of club control before he goes off to free agency. There have been attempts to talk extension with him that didn't gain much traction. And then there was some stuff that came out publicly from his side that didn't really impact, anything that we were doing. But there was noise surrounding the player. But it's our job to maximize value, as I said, to maximize value of our assets. And so, the year before, we didn't see a deal that made sense for a top, and as you say, Ethan, I think the top at the time, the top catcher in baseball. But we'll go with yours, a top 3 catcher. So 17 teams involved, and they all want the player. We have our internal system, evaluative system that has our scouting reports and our analytic metrics, and has our video and everything that we utilize to help us make our decisions. And you build deals with each respective organization, and deals that we feel fit what we're trying to accomplish, and that's maximize his value. And ultimately, Craig Mish got it wrong, but
poor Craig. His ego's too big. So I appreciate this.
I told him at the time that he was way off base too, but I'll get back to the point. But so you work the process, and we were very thorough, and we maintained communication with all 17 clubs, and then you narrow it because you see who's really serious ultimately in making a deal, and things get a little more serious once you narrow the field, and then ultimately you find a club that you think has the pieces to make a deal, to make a deal that you think makes sense. And I think what makes it go and gets you traction is when the major pieces are players that make sense. So we saw a deal in Philly where we were trading away 2 years of JT Realmuto for 5 years of Jorge Alfaro, 25-year-old, comparably athletic catcher, big-time power, one of the best throwing arms in the game. 5 years of him. And then, one of the top pitching prospects in all of baseball, and Sixto Sanchez, a 20-year-old who had pitched his way to Double-A, plus pitches across the board, someone who projects as a front of the rotation starter in the future. And, we ended up getting those two pieces as the start of the deal. And then we added in their top left-handed pitching prospect in Will Stewart, who we think projects as another the middle of the rotation starting pitcher. And we got international money on top of that. So we were very pleased with the return that we got, turning 2 years of an asset into however many years of control and talent that we think will contribute to many championships for many years to come.
So you said 17 teams involved initially. I'm not going to make you name them all. The last day of it, before you go, I assume at the point when you got the offer you wanted and you go to ownership or whatever and say, are we good to go here? How many teams were involved at the end stage? You don't have to reveal them, but I'm just curious. On the last day, was it 3 teams were still kind of in the mix there? How many were you playing off of each other at that? Because I assume there's a little bit of a game of chicken that's going on there at the end. Like, if we don't get this, we're going to go forward with this. So how many were you dealing with in the last 24 hours?
I would say, when things got serious, we were probably down to 5 clubs. I consider myself to be a fair negotiator. You talk to my peers, you talk to other, representatives. I think I have a fair reputation as a negotiator. And, from our standpoint, we were clear with all of the clubs of what it was going to take. So each respective club sort of knew the bar that they had to get over to get traction, in the discussions. And as you finally get serious with Philadelphia, you just make them aware. I'm not hiding the ball, with our asset. If we get what we want, we'll make the deal. If we don't, then we'll keep the player. We have him for 2 more years, and we're happy with doing that, more than happy to do that. We did not have to trade him. But in the end, it just made sense for what we're building to maximize the value of an asset to make the deal with Philadelphia. And we ultimately got there. And, once you got to the agreement, you have to work through all of the paperwork at that point and the medical reviews. And then you ultimately, once you get approvals on all that, you have an official deal.
I wanted to talk to you about Realmuto, but also you mentioned those 5 position players that you had that were kind of the basis of the team, and you just decided that that wasn't enough. And you said that Realmuto, it was in your mind the best catcher in baseball at the time. I remember covering Media Day in 2015, I want to say, and before that season, you said that we feel like we have the best outfield in baseball. I remember looking at you going, "Wait, really?" Like I didn't see the projection for what Yelich and Ozuna ended up becoming. So when you feel like you have, that feels like a massive part of a foundation of a playoff caliber team. Best outfield in baseball, best catcher in baseball. Why do you think that didn't quite get all the way?
Pitching. That's easy.
Yeah.
Pitching dominates this game. Mm-hmm. It's over half your roster. It impacts the game on a daily basis. And we just did not have the pitching. And obviously there was a tragedy that struck the organization in September of 2016. And, that changed a lot of things because you didn't have that ace at the front of your rotation. But it's always pitching, and I think you asked a question earlier about, it wasn't a lesson learned. It was a lesson I've always believed in. That if you're going to build it, you need to have those waves of pitching, and it needs to be championship caliber pitching. We want the guys who are going to lead us to championships, the cute little guys who are going to, pitch at the back end of the rotation. Those guys are nice, and there's a role for them. But we know that you win championships when you get those big physical guys who are going to pitch game 1 and game 4 and game 7 of a playoff series. And every time they take the mound, they have an opportunity to throw a no-hitter or to shut a team out. And when you look at the pitchers that we're going to be running out there, you're going to have that similar feeling. And they're just growing in their abilities. But you're going to have that feeling with Jose Urena. You're going to have that feeling with Pablo Lopez, who actually his last outing went 5 scoreless, shutout, no-hit innings, perfect innings, his last outing out. But because I think that just impacts the game so much. Obviously, we need to score runs and you need to have the right group of position players. But I truly believe that it all starts with that championship caliber pitching.
And you mentioned Jose, and I wanted to ask you about, and it seemed grim, right? So when it happens, it's all about the family and just how awful it was. And those next couple of nights, I went to the ballpark for that first game after he died, and just what an emotional and tragic scene that was. But do you have, with sort of the ability of time and years, to step back and go, this is how it changed the trajectory of our team, and just how many different ways the organization has had to sort of evolve from that, from a baseball point of view?
I mean, that's a pretty multi-layered question. And I mean, you hit it. It changed a lot. Just from a baseball standpoint, just having an ace. You go one day having an ace, the next day you don't have an ace. And you can build a pitching staff a lot of different ways when you know you have games 1, 4, and 7 covered. And, that's essentially what was lost that early morning of September 26th. So from that standpoint, you never forget the player or the memory, but you have to move on and you have to try to work with what you have. And you had a group of position players that were talented, but it just magnified the need to have pitching. And when the pitching wasn't there, the lack of pitching and the lack of a minor league system, and just highlighted a lot of holes that you were covering up because you were trying to chase at the major league level.
So I want to get into the benchmarks now a little bit, because now that you've brought in some prospects, there seem to be certain themes in terms of the prospects that you've brought in. And I just want to see if we're identifying this correctly. So when you take a look at pitching, it seems that velocity matters, and as you said, physicality matters. And when I look at the position players you're bringing in, it seems like athleticism is a big part of this. Obviously, you want as many tools as possible, but there seems to be sort of a common thread there. Is that accurate? Is that what you're looking? I mean, I know you don't want to pigeonhole guys, but the overall philosophical sort of view of the organization, is that where it is for you?
Yes, I think that's fair, Ethan. When you look at our position players, I want you to see athleticism. I want you to see physicality. I want you to see championship caliber players. When you look at Lewis Brinson, he's 6'5" and 215 pounds, and Monty Harrison is 6'3", 215, and they all can run like the wind, and they can play plus defense, and they can impact the game in every way conceivable. And I think that's probably the overriding quality when you think about our talent and our search of talent, is we want impact, because our goal is to win championships, and so our standard is championship caliber talent. So you want the most athletic, you want the most physical, you want the best delivery, you want the loosest arms, the guys who throw the hardest, knowing that obviously that there's some refinement with all of that, but the bar is set very high here, and that is what we work towards every day. And that won't ever change.
And from a player development standpoint, I feel like a lot of teams are kind of going for that high-level athleticism, or are looking for the same things, but ultimately it is the development and the coaching that plays a massive role in that. You mentioned Don Mattingly as kind of your partner in all of this. How difficult is it to turn prospect into player, a major league level, high-end player that is delivering game in and game out? How difficult is that process actually?
It is definitely a test of patience, a test of commitment, a test of dedication. But when you look at our player development system, that's run by Gary Dimbo and Dick Scott, that there's everyone is in on what we're building here. There's complete buy-in from top to bottom, and that commitment is obvious. And everywhere you look and everyone you talk to, there's an enthusiasm for what we're building. And I think, the one thing that we do have, and in my 25th year in baseball, we have experience. So we know that this is not an easy process, and we know that it takes patience, but it takes commitment, and it takes, an unwavering commitment. It's easy to change courses when the going gets tough. But when, Lewis Brinson's hitting below 200 in the big leagues, but you believe in what you're doing with him and you believe in the work that he's doing to make himself a better player, that takes resolve. And I think that's one thing organizationally. We have a solid understanding of who we are, but even more so, we have a solid understanding of where we're going organizationally, and we're committed to getting ourselves there.
So is it fair to say that you're having more fun now?
I don't know what could make you think that, but a big smile on my face. No, but it's, when you see the young athletes and when you see the power arms and, the pitching staff could be mistaken for a basketball team because everybody's 6'5" and 6'6", and they're all throwing 100. That's what's so exciting, because you see, we've been here. We've seen this. I've seen this happen before, and that's why I get excited, because I believe in these young players and what they are going to become. And when I tell you that these guys have talent, are you going to believe me next time, Chris? When I tell you these guys have talent? Okay.
He's our network.
I tried to tell Mish back in the day.
But I will tell you this, to be fair to Chris on this, because we've had a lot of conversations about, I've covered the Heat for years and years and what the Dolphins are engaging in now. And I will say Chris has been a proponent of the idea that you don't want to be in the middle. Right, and I'm curious for your view on that in baseball, because we've talked about the Astros a little bit, but the Dolphins are doing a reset. That's basically what they've acknowledged. You look at free agency the past couple of days, it's clear they're not going to spend big money on guys. They're going to break it down, try to find their quarterback and build back up. The Heat always sort of want to try to compete, even if it's from the middle on up. So I guess the question is, are you a fan of sort of other sports? Do you follow kind of this trend? Because it does seem like the middle in sports is the worst possible place to be.
No, I'm a sports fan. As you know, I was a multi-sport athlete growing up, so I follow, what the other sports are doing. Chris Greer is actually a good friend. Our kids played Little League Baseball together, so I know Chris with the Dolphins well. But, the goal is to win championships. You don't do that middling. You don't give yourself an opportunity to win championships unless you're built the right way to do that. And, that's why in, the fall of 17, there were tough decisions that needed to be made. You really had to look in the mirror and to say, these position players are good. They are. But if I'm going to be honest with how you truly win a championship and how you, are the last team standing, you don't do it without pitching. You don't do it without a strong minor league system. And we didn't have either of those. And so, I think that's, the stress that comes with the job, that, those are tough decisions that, are not easy, but ones that if you're being honest with yourself, if you're being honest with the organization, with the community, you just have to say that this is not going to work, and we need to do something differently.
All right, so final.
I just want to ask you about the resolve element of it, because I don't think that a lot of teams that have set out on these sorts of plans, like the ones that you guys have undertook, have really the people that have been the initiators of it have gotten to see it through the full length of the way. One of the areas that I think it could be different for you guys is that this seems to have been part of the plan from ownership, and if ownership is bought in, then they can't really, say it's your fault. This was their idea as well as it was your idea. So is there any level of concern that embarking on this strategy could potentially result in your position being questioned, or your tactics being questioned of how you're doing this job?
Control what you can control, Chris. That's a value I live by. I know I have a job to do. I'm asked my opinion of how I think we need to do it, and obviously ownership is is very much involved and, stay in communication with them. But as I said, we've got buy-in from top to bottom on what we're building here. And I think we're all incredibly excited with what the future holds, and can't wait to see it through.
All right, so last one here. Somebody else in our network. So I just want to ask you, what kind of a neighbor is O.J. McDuffie?
Yes, I do know someone else in there, and O.J.'s great. And we also have a son of similar ages, and we have a wall between our two houses, so his son routinely jumps over and hits in the cage with my son. So it's all good. He's a great neighbor. Doesn't play the music too loud, so it's all good.
Have you played on that court?
We actually have our own court.
Oh,
so.
see, look at that. Living the life of West Broward. All right, I understand it. I get it. All right, that's very good stuff. All right, Mike Hill, obviously we'll be following the Marlins closely this year. Really appreciate the time and the cooperation. Just one thing I want to say before we go. Cooperation from the team has been really great with us, and that we've noticed a change in that regard, in terms of maybe what was experienced a few years ago. So we appreciate that, and hopefully we'll be sort of along the ride as you guys grow this thing.
Thank you for listening to the Fire Ringer podcast. Thank you so much.